In the ancient days of Israel, when judges ruled the land and chaos seemed to be the order of the day, something happened in the life of one ordinary family that would quietly reshape the course of history. Now, this is not just a story about grief and hardship. It is a story about choices, about loyalty so fierce it defies logic, about a love that crosses every boundary people thought could never be crossed. And at the center of it all is a foreign woman named Ruth, who walked away from everything she had ever known to follow her broken mother-in-law into a land she had never seen. What makes this story remarkable is not just what Ruth did. It is what God did through her, working behind the scenes in the most difficult of circumstances, guiding events that seemed random toward a purpose no one could have predicted. So let us go back in time. Let us meet this family from Bethlehem who fled hunger and found far more than they ever expected in a foreign land. And let us discover how a young Moabite woman, an outsider in every sense of the word, became one of the most important figures in the entire biblical story. The Book of Ruth opens in hard times. Ruth 1 verse 1 tells us plainly, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab." Now think about the irony here. Bethlehem literally means house of bread, and yet there was no bread to be found. The fields that should have been golden with grain were barren. The ground was cracked and dry. Families were going hungry. And one man, a man named Elimelech, looked at the situation and decided he could not watch his family starve. Elimelech did not make that decision overnight. This was not some impulse. The famine was severe, widespread, devastating. He looked at his wife Naomi, a woman he loved deeply. He looked at their 2 young sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and he knew in his bones that if they stayed, they might not survive, so he made the hardest choice a father can make. He packed up his family's belongings, said goodbye to his homeland, and set out for a place no Israelite would normally choose to go. The journey was not easy. From the hill country of Judah, the family traveled east, crossing the Jordan River Valley, skirting the shores of the Dead Sea, and climbing into the highlands of Moab. It was a foreign land with foreign people, different customs, a different way of life, and most importantly, different gods. The Moabites were traditionally enemies of Israel. They were descendants of Moab, the child born from Lot's incestuous relationship with his eldest daughter, a story recorded back in Genesis 19. The 2 nations had a long history of tension and mistrust. But hunger does not care about politics or history. When your children are starving, you go where the food is. And so, as verse 2 tells us, they went to Moab and lived there. It was meant to be temporary, just a short stay until the famine in Judah passed and they could return home. They settled in as foreigners, outsiders, trying to make the best of a bad situation. Elimelech worked hard to support his family. Naomi did what she could to raise their boys, teaching them the traditions and the faith of their people, even while living in exile among people who did not share that faith. And then the years started slipping by. What was supposed to be a brief stay stretched on and on. Mahlon and Chilion grew up in Moab. They learned the local language. They made friends among the Moabites. They adapted to their new surroundings in the way that young people do, absorbing the culture around them while still carrying pieces of their parents' world inside them. Then, without warning, tragedy struck. Verse 3 delivers the blow in a single line. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Just like that, everything changed. The man who had led his family to safety, who had made the hard decision to leave Bethlehem, who had worked to build a new life in a foreign land, was gone. We do not know how he died. The Bible does not tell us. All we know is that Naomi was suddenly a widow, a foreigner in a country that was not her own, with 2 sons who were now her only source of security and hope. Naomi grieved deeply, but she found comfort in the fact that Mahlon and Chilion were there. They were young men now, strong and capable, and they stepped up to take care of their mother. Life went on, as it always does, even after loss. And as time passed, the two brothers became more integrated into Moabite society. They had grown up there after all. Moab was the only home they really remembered. And then they did something that would have raised eyebrows back in Israel. They married Moabite women. Verse 4 gives us the details. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, after they had lived there about 10 years. Mahlon married Ruth, a kind and hard-working young woman with a quiet strength about her. Chilion chose Orpah, equally devoted and loving. These Moabite women were welcomed into the family. They learned from Naomi about the customs of Israel, about the God her people worshipped. Though they came from a people who followed other gods, they respected their new family's ways and embraced them as best they could. For a time, there was happiness. The households lived in relative harmony. The daughters-in-law helped Naomi with the daily work. Everyone pulled together. It was not the life any of them had planned, but it was a life, and it was theirs. But the happiness did not last. Verse 5 hits like a hammer. Both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. Try to put yourself in Naomi's place for a moment. First, she lost her husband, and now both of her sons. We do not know how they died, whether it was illness or accident or something else entirely. The Bible simply does not say. What it does tell us is the devastation this left behind. 3 women, all widows now, sharing the same house and the same suffocating grief. For Naomi, it felt like her entire world had collapsed. She was in a foreign land with no husband, no sons, no grandchildren. All she had were her 2 Moabite daughters-in-law, who were themselves shattered by the loss of their young husbands. The 3 women leaned on one another in their mourning. They wept together. They sat in silence together. They tried to figure out how to face the next day, when the next day felt impossible, and the future looked terrifying. In that society, women depended on men for survival. A father, a husband, a son. Without one of those, a woman had almost no standing, no protection, no reliable way to provide for herself. 3 widows living together with no male relative to support them faced a path that was bleak by any measure. After the death of her sons, Naomi entered a time of deep darkness. The nights dragged on endlessly, and the mornings brought nothing but memories of everything she had lost. She questioned everything. Why had they come to Moab? Had God abandoned her? Was this punishment for leaving Bethlehem? The weight of it all pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. But then one day, a piece of news arrived that changed everything. Or at least, it offered the faintest glimmer of something that might be hope. Ruth 1 verse 6 tells us, "When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there." The famine in Israel was over. God had remembered his people. The rains had come again, and the land was producing abundant harvests. For Naomi, it felt like a calling. After nearly 10 years in Moab, a decade of exile and loss and grief, she felt a pull in her heart to go home, to go back to Bethlehem, back to her own people, back to the land where she had once been happy. There was nothing left for her in Moab now. Her husband and her sons were buried in its soil, and the memories there were more painful than sweet. But Bethlehem was where she had relatives, where she had friends from her youth, where people still remembered her from before all the pain. Naomi packed up what little she had left. Years of hardship had stripped away nearly everything. Orpah and Ruth helped her gather what they could carry for the long journey ahead. And the 3 women set out on the road back to Judah. But as they walked, Naomi started thinking, not about herself, but about these 2 young women who were walking beside her. Orpah and Ruth were still young. They were beautiful. They had their whole lives ahead of them. Why should they follow her? a broken old woman, to a land they had never seen. What kind of future could she offer them in Israel? None. Absolutely none. In Israel, they would be foreigners. Moabite women viewed with suspicion and hostility, but in Moab, they were known. They had families. They could remarry, have children, build new lives. So, somewhere along that dusty road, Naomi stopped walking. She turned to face her daughters-in-law, and with tears streaming down her face, she spoke from the deepest part of her heart. Verses 8 and 9 record her words. "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Do you hear what she's doing here? Naomi is thinking about what is best for them, not for herself. She's putting their futures above her own loneliness. She's blessing them and releasing them from any sense of obligation. And then she kissed them goodbye, preparing to continue her journey alone. Verse 9 says, "They all wept aloud." The three of them stood there on that road, sobbing together. These women had shared everything, joy and sorrow, celebration and grief. The bond between them was real and deep, forged in the fire of shared suffering. Saying goodbye was agonizing, and at first both Orpah and Ruth refused to leave. "No," they said, "we will go back with you to your people." Verse 10, they meant it. They loved Naomi and did not want to abandon her, but Naomi insisted. She was painfully practical about it, laying out her reasoning in verses 11 through 13. "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." These were harsh words, but they were honest. According to Israelite custom, a deceased man's brother was supposed to marry his widow to carry on the family name. But Naomi had no more sons. And even if she somehow married again and had children, how many years would Orpah and Ruth have to wait for those boys to grow up? It was a hopeless situation, and Naomi knew it. The three women wept again, the pain of their approaching separation cutting even deeper now. And then Orpah made her choice. Verse 14, "Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her." Orpah kissed Naomi through her tears. It was not an easy decision, and nobody should judge her for it. It was the practical choice, the sensible choice. She would return to her mother's house, just as Naomi had urged. She would go back to her people, her customs, her familiar world, and try to rebuild her life. Naomi did not blame her. She understood completely. In fact, Naomi used Orpah's departure to try one more time to convince Ruth. "Look," she said in verse 15, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." It was Naomi's final attempt to set Ruth free from a burden she felt was too heavy for someone so young. But Ruth did not move. As Orpah's figure grew smaller in the distance, walking back toward Moab, Ruth stayed right where she was, planted at Naomi's side like a tree with roots too deep to pull up. There was something extraordinary about this young Moabite woman, a quiet, fierce determination that went far beyond anything ordinary. Even after hearing Naomi's repeated pleas, even after watching Orpah walk away, even after understanding exactly how difficult the road ahead would be, Ruth did not waver, not even slightly. And then came one of the most powerful moments in the entire Bible. Ruth looked into Naomi's eyes and spoke words that have echoed through thousands of years. Words recorded in Ruth 1, verses 16 and 17. "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." Let those words sink in for a moment. This was not a sentimental gesture. This was a solemn vow. Ruth was not just choosing to keep Naomi company on a trip. She was declaring that she would give up everything: her homeland, her family, her friends, her traditions, even the gods she had grown up worshipping. She was saying, "I am done with my old life. Your world is my world now. Your God is my God. And nothing, not even death, will separate us. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Ruth had been watching. During all those years living with Naomi's family, she had observed something about the God of Israel that the gods of Moab did not offer. Maybe it was the way Naomi prayed. Maybe it was the stories Elimelech had told about God's faithfulness. Maybe it was something she could not even put into words. But whatever it was, it had taken root in her heart, and now she was ready to make it her own completely. Naomi was stunned into silence. Verse 18 tells us, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. There was nothing left to say. Ruth had made her choice. A choice that would shape both of their destinies in ways neither of them could yet imagine. And so the two women, one older and broken by grief, the other young and fiercely loyal, turned their faces toward Bethlehem and started walking. The journey from Moab to Bethlehem covered roughly 80 kilometers of rugged terrain. Mountains, desert valleys, rocky paths barely wide enough for a single person. For two women traveling without any male escort, it was dangerous. Robbers lurked along these roads. Wild animals roamed the wilderness. There was no one to protect them but each other. They walked during the day when the heat allowed it. They rested when the sun became unbearable, finding shade under whatever rocks or trees they could. At night, they camped in the open, sharing what little food they had brought with them. Along the way, Naomi talked about Bethlehem, what the town was like before the famine. The people Ruth might meet there, the customs she would need to understand. Ruth listened to every word, trying to picture what her new life would look like. As they walked, Ruth must have thought constantly about what she was leaving behind. Her mother, her father, her childhood friends, every familiar sight and sound and smell. She was heading toward a place where she would be a stranger, a Moabite in Israelite territory. And the Israelites did not have warm feelings about Moabites. They were seen as descendants of an incestuous relationship, worshippers of false gods, historical enemies. Ruth knew this. She had to know that she would face suspicion, maybe even hostility, but she kept walking. Her loyalty to Naomi was stronger than her fear, and somewhere deep in her heart, she sensed that this journey was about more than simply changing her address. She felt drawn towards something greater, though she could not yet see what it was. Day by day, the landscape changed around them. The dry hills of Moab gave way to the greener mountains of Judah. And finally, after many long, exhausting days of travel, they saw it. Bethlehem appeared on the horizon, a small town nestled among rolling green hills. It was the beginning of spring, the time of the barley harvest. The fields surrounding the town shimmered golden in the sunlight, heavy with grain ready to be reaped. For Naomi, it was a sight that stirred up everything inside her at once. This was home, but she was returning as a completely different person than the one who had left. Ruth 1, verse 19, describes their arrival. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" Bethlehem was a small community. Everyone knew everyone else's business. Many of the townspeople still remembered Naomi, the wife of Elimelech, who had left with her family during the famine nearly 10 years before. And now, here she was, walking through the town gate, looking decades older than she should, accompanied only by a young foreign woman. Where was Elimelech? Where were her sons? People stepped out of their homes, shading their eyes against the sun, pointing and whispering. "Is that Naomi?" they asked one another. barely recognizing the woman who stood before them, stooped and worn down by years of grief and hardship. Naomi heard the whispers. She felt the weight of every stare, and she did not try to hide what she had become. In verse 20, she spoke plainly, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." Naomi means pleasant or sweet. Mara means bitter. Naomi was saying, "That pleasant woman you remember, she is gone. What is standing before you is bitterness itself." And she continued in verse 21, pouring her heart out with raw honesty. "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has testified against me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." When she had left Bethlehem, she had a husband, 2 sons, a future. She had gone away full. Now she returned with nothing. Nothing except a foreign daughter-in-law standing quietly beside her. In Naomi's mind, God himself had turned against her and stripped her of everything she loved. The people of Bethlehem listened in silence, taking in the depth of her pain. Some of the older women who had known her before stepped forward to offer what comfort they could. There was sympathy in their eyes. Meanwhile, Ruth stood off to the side, taking everything in with watchful, careful eyes. These were the people she had chosen as her own. These dusty streets would be her new home. She could feel the wary glances directed at her. She was a foreigner, a Moabite, and some of these people clearly were not sure what to make of her. But she stood firm. She had made her choice, and she was not going back on it. Verse 22 closes the first chapter. So Naomi returned from Moab accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. That detail about the barley harvest is not random. It tells us something about God's timing. They arrived in spring, a season of renewal. The fields were full of grain. The feast of Passover was approaching. For a land that had been starved by famine, this was a time of celebration and abundance. But for Naomi and Ruth, it was a time of uncertainty. 2 widows with no male protector, no income, no sure way to feed themselves. In both Israelite and Moabite culture, women depended on men for security. Without a father, husband, or son, they were vulnerable. They needed food, and they needed it quickly, which meant someone had to work. Thankfully, God had built a safety net into the law of Israel. One of the most beautiful provisions was the law of gleaning. Landowners who harvested their fields were commanded not to strip them completely clean. They were to leave the edges unharvested and not go back for any grain that fell during the reaping. That leftover grain was for the poor, the widows, the orphans, and the foreigners. Leviticus 23 verse 22 spells it out. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. For Ruth and Naomi, this law was about to become a lifeline. That first night in Bethlehem, as they settled into some humble corner, the 2 women must have talked about what to do next. Ruth, used to hard work and not one to sit idle, almost certainly volunteered to go to the fields. Naomi, who knew the local customs, would have explained how gleaning worked, what to expect, and how to conduct herself. And so ended their first day back in Bethlehem. They were exhausted from the journey. The future was uncertain, but they were alive. They were together, and the harvest was just beginning. The sun had barely risen when Ruth got up the next morning. She looked at Naomi, still sleeping, and made a decision. They needed food. The barley harvest was in full swing in the fields around Bethlehem. It was time to act, not wait. Ruth understood the gleaning law from what Naomi had taught her, and she was determined to use it. She did not want to be a burden on her mother-in-law. She wanted to provide. So she went to Naomi and said, as recorded in Ruth 2, verse 2, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Notice how she asked for permission. She showed respect for Naomi even while demonstrating her own initiative and determination. She was not going to sit around hoping food would appear. She was going to go get it. Naomi saw the resolve in her daughter-in-law's eyes and simply said, "Go ahead, my daughter." Perhaps she offered some last-minute guidance about where to go and how to behave around the workers. But she trusted Ruth. She trusted her judgment and her character. And so, with an empty basket and hope pressing against the anxiety in her chest, Ruth set out toward the fields. She did not know anyone in Bethlehem. She did not know exactly which field to go to. She simply followed where she saw other workers heading and chose a field where she could begin gleaning. Verse 3 describes what happened next. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. It was back-breaking work. Ruth bent low under the hot sun, scanning the ground for every stalk and kernel that the harvesters had missed or dropped. She picked up each piece of grain carefully and placed it in her basket. Her back ached. The sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat ran into her eyes. But she kept going, thinking about Naomi back at home, thinking about the meal they would share that evening. Now, here is where the story takes a turn that changes everything. Out of all the fields in Bethlehem, out of every possible patch of land Ruth could have wandered into that morning, she ended up in one particular field. Verse 3 continues, "As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech." As it turned out. The text says it so casually, as if it were a coincidence. But as we are about to see, there was nothing coincidental about it. This was the hand of God directing Ruth's steps without her even knowing it. Boaz was not just any landowner. He was one of the wealthiest and most respected men in Bethlehem. He was influential, generous, and feared God. And here is the detail that matters most. He was a relative of Elimelech, Naomi's dead husband. Under Israelite law, that family connection carried serious responsibilities. Boaz was what the law called a kinsman redeemer, a close relative who had specific obligations to care for the family of a deceased kinsman. Ruth knew none of this. She was just a foreign woman trying to gather enough grain to survive. As she worked, the other gleaners and some of the hired workers began to notice her. Her appearance, the way she spoke, her clothing, everything about her marked her as an outsider. She was clearly not an Israelite. Some of the workers might have been hostile. Others were probably just curious. But Ruth kept her head down and focused on her task. She worked without complaint, without stopping, picking up grain one stalk at a time from early morning onward. And then Boaz arrived. He came from town to check on the harvest. As any good landowner would, it was an ordinary day for him, at least until his eyes landed on the unfamiliar young woman, working with such focus among the gleaners. Ruth 2, verse 4, records his arrival. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Right away, you can see what kind of man Boaz was. This was not a boss barking orders. This was a man who honored God in his daily interactions, who treated his workers with respect, and who earned their respect in return. As he looked over the field, someone caught his eye. A young woman he did not recognize, working harder than almost anyone else there. Curious, Boaz turned to the foreman who was overseeing the harvesters and asked, as we read in verse 5, "Who does that young woman belong to?" A simple question, but it was about to set several lives on a completely new course. The foreman answered in verses 6 and 7, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." The foreman did not just identify Ruth. He highlighted her character. She had asked permission before gleaning, showing respect for the landowner. She had been working since dawn, with only one brief break. That kind of work ethic, spoke volumes. Boaz had already heard the talk around town about Naomi's return. He knew she was the widow of his relative Elimelech, and he had heard the story that everyone in Bethlehem was buzzing about, the Moabite daughter-in-law who had refused to go home, who had chosen to leave everything behind to follow her grieving mother-in-law to a foreign land. Looking at Ruth now, working in the sun without complaint, Boaz felt something stir inside him, a mix of compassion, respect, and admiration. He decided to speak to her himself. He approached Ruth with a kindness that must have startled her. He did not talk down to her or treat her as a nuisance. He spoke to her as someone worthy of care and attention. Verse 8 records his words, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me." Think about what Boaz was doing. He was not just giving Ruth grudging permission to glean in his field. He was explicitly inviting her to stay. He was offering her a permanent place, a spot among his own female workers where she would be safe and protected. And he went further, as verse 9 continues, "Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." Boaz was thinking practically about her safety. A foreign woman alone in a field of male workers was vulnerable. Boaz had already ordered his men to leave her alone. He was also giving her access to the water his own servants had drawn, a small but meaningful comfort during hours of labor under the scorching sun. Ruth was stunned. She had expected, at best, to be tolerated. She was a foreigner, a Moabite. She had no reason to expect kindness, let alone active protection from a man of Boaz's standing. Overcome, she bowed down with her face to the ground and asked him the question that was burning in her mind. Verse 10, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" It was an honest question. Why would someone like Boaz care about someone like her? Boaz's answer revealed that his kindness was no random act. He knew exactly who she was and what she had done. Verses 11 and 12. "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Boaz had heard the whole story. Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, her willingness to give up everything, her choice to seek shelter under the wings of Israel's God. All of it pointed to a character that was rare and beautiful, and Boaz recognized it openly. Ruth responded with humility in verse 13. "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." She understood the honor being given to her, and she received it with grace, without pretending she deserved it, and without rejecting it out of false modesty. The kindness did not stop there. At mealtime, Boaz invited Ruth to eat with the workers. Verse 14, "At mealtime, Boaz said to her, 'Come over here, have some bread, and dip it in the wine vinegar.' When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over." This was extraordinary. Gleaners did not eat with the harvesters. They certainly did not sit at the landowner's table. And a Moabite foreigner being offered a seat alongside Israelite workers. That was almost unheard of. But Boaz made sure Ruth had more than enough. She ate until she was full and still had food to spare. And after the meal, when Ruth went back to work, Boaz quietly pulled his workers aside and gave them special instructions. Verses 15 and 16. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." Pay attention to what Boaz did here. He went far beyond what the gleaning law required. He was not just allowing Ruth to pick up leftover grain. He was telling his workers to deliberately pull stalks out of the harvested bundles and leave them where she would find them. He was secretly increasing her haul without embarrassing her with obvious charity. She would still be working for every grain she collected, preserving her dignity, but her basket would be far fuller thanks to his quiet generosity. Ruth worked until evening. When she finally stopped and threshed what she had gathered, beating the grain to separate it from the husks, the result was astonishing. Verse 17 tells us it amounted to about an ephah of barley. That was a massive amount for a single day of gleaning, enough to feed 2 people for many days, far more than any ordinary gleaner would expect to collect. With this precious haul, Ruth headed back to the city, eager to share both the food and the story of her extraordinary day. When Ruth walked through the door, carrying that heavy sack of barley, Naomi could hardly believe her eyes. This was not a normal day's gleaning, not even close. Verse 19 captures Naomi's reaction. "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Naomi knew immediately that someone had shown Ruth unusual favor. No gleaner comes home with this much grain unless someone went out of their way to help. Ruth told the whole story. The field she had chosen, the encounter with Boaz, the kindness he had shown, the meal, the protection, all of it. And then she said the name of the man I worked with today is Boaz. Watch what happened next. Naomi's expression changed completely. Something lit up in her eyes that had not been there for a very long time. Hope. Verse 20. "The Lord bless him," Naomi exclaimed. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." Then she revealed something Ruth did not know. That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers. Naomi saw something that Ruth, as a foreigner, would not immediately grasp. Boaz was not just a generous man who happened to be kind to a widow. He was a goel, a kinsman redeemer. Under Israelite law, a goel had specific rights and duties regarding the family of a deceased relative. The law of the levirate, found in Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 and 6, stated that when an Israelite man died without a son, his brother or nearest male relative was to marry the widow and give her a child who would carry on the name and inheritance of the deceased. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. On top of that, a goel also had the responsibility to buy back any family land that had been sold because of poverty, as Leviticus 25 verse 25 spells out, "If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold." Naomi suddenly saw a path forward. Boaz, as a close relative of Elimelech, could potentially serve as their kinsman redeemer. He could marry Ruth, preserve the family line, and possibly even recover family property that had been lost during their years in Moab. What had seemed like a hopeless situation now had a glimmer of possibility. Ruth shared more of what Boaz had told her. Verse 21, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" He had offered protection not just for a day, but for the entire harvest season. Naomi saw a divine hand at work and encouraged Ruth to accept the offer. Verse 22, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." And so Ruth did exactly that. Verse 23, "So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. For weeks, Ruth worked in Boaz's fields, always under his protection, always returning home with more than enough food. It was a season of stability and provision after so much chaos and loss. For the first time in a long while, the two women could eat without worrying about where the next meal would come from. But Naomi was thinking ahead. Gleaning was a seasonal solution. When the harvest ended, what then? How would two widows survive through winter with no income, no land, no provider? The more Naomi thought about it, the more she became convinced that something needed to happen. And inspired by the way God had already steered Ruth into Boaz's field, she began to form a plan. It was a bold plan, a risky plan, a plan that, if it worked, could secure their future permanently. And if it went wrong, it could destroy them. Ruth 3 verses 1 through 4 records Naomi laying it out. "My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." Now, to modern ears, this might sound strange or even scandalous. But Naomi knew exactly what she was doing, and more importantly, she knew exactly who Boaz was. She knew his character, his integrity, his fear of God. She was not setting Ruth up for a seduction. She was guiding Ruth to present herself as eligible for marriage under the kinsman-redeemer law. By instructing Ruth to uncover Boaz's feet and lie down, Naomi was directing Ruth to make a symbolic request. It was a formal gesture, a quiet but clear reminder to Boaz of his role and responsibility as a Goel. It was Ruth's way of saying, without words, "I am placing myself under your protection. Will you fulfill your duty as kinsman redeemer?" Ruth trusted Naomi's wisdom. She had seen nothing but integrity in Boaz during their encounters, and she trusted the God of Israel under whose wings she had come to take refuge. So she answered simply in verse 5, "I will do whatever you say." The harvest was over, and it was time for celebration. Boaz, as the landowner, was overseeing the final stage of the process, the winnowing of barley at the threshing floor. This was when the grain was tossed into the air so the wind could carry away the lighter chaff, while the heavier grain fell back to the ground. It was a joyful time, a time of abundance after weeks of hard labor. Verse 7 tells us what happened that night. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. Boaz was not drunk. He was simply content, satisfied after a good meal, and pleased with a successful harvest. The threshing floor was typically an open area on a hilltop, and it was common during harvest time for landowners to sleep there overnight to guard their freshly processed grain from thieves. Ruth had followed Naomi's instructions precisely. She had washed, put on perfume, and dressed in her best clothes. She waited in the shadows until everyone had fallen asleep and Boaz had settled down for the night. Then, moving quietly, she approached him, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Sometime in the middle of the night, Boaz woke up with a start. Perhaps the chill on his uncovered feet disturbed him. Perhaps he heard movement nearby. Verse 8. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Imagine the shock, waking in the dark to find someone there. "Who are you?" he asked in verse 9, his voice probably tense with surprise. Ruth answered plainly, "I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." Her answer was direct and clear. "Spread your wings over your servant" was a recognized Hebrew expression tied to marriage and covenant protection. Ruth was, in effect, making a proposal, and she grounded it not in emotion or manipulation, but in the law itself. You are a guardian redeemer. This moment was ripe for misunderstanding. A young woman approaching a man at night while he slept? It could have looked improper, scandalous even. But Boaz understood exactly what Ruth was doing. He saw the honor in it, the courage, the purity. His response, recorded in verses 10 and 11, reveals the kind of man he was. "The Lord bless you, my daughter. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." Boaz was moved. He saw Ruth's request as an act of loyalty, both to Naomi and to the memory of her late husband Mahlon. He praised her for not chasing after younger men. She could have gone looking for a young, handsome husband. Instead, she honored the law and sought out the kinsman redeemer, putting family duty above personal desire. And he affirmed publicly what the whole town already knew. Ruth was a woman of noble character. But there was a complication. Being a man of integrity, Boaz was transparent about it. Verse 12. "Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Under the law, the duty of redemption fell first to the closest relative. Boaz could not simply bypass this other man's rights, no matter how much he wanted to. He had to follow the proper legal process. So he made Ruth a promise. Verse 13. "Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." Boaz swore an oath before God. If the closer relative stepped up, fine. But if he did not, Boaz would personally take on the responsibility. It was a firm commitment. Ruth trusted him and stayed until dawn. But Boaz, thinking about Ruth's reputation, made sure she left before anyone could see her. Verse 14. "So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, 'No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor.' Before she left, Boaz gave her one more gift. Verse 15, he also said, 'Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out.' When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. It was a generous gift, a tangible promise that he would take care of things. Ruth returned home carrying not just grain, but hope. When she arrived, Naomi asked her how things had gone. Ruth told her everything. Every word Boaz had said, every promise he had made. Naomi listened carefully and then offered this assessment in verse 18. "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Naomi knew Boaz. She knew that once he gave his word, he would act immediately. There would be no delays, no excuses. The matter would be resolved before the day was over. And she was right. Early the next morning, Boaz went straight to the town gate. This was not just a doorway in a wall. The town gate was the center of public life in Bethlehem. Business deals were finalized there. Legal disputes were settled there. It was the courthouse, the marketplace, and the town square all rolled into one. Ruth 4, verses 1 and 2 describe the scene. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, and when the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Boaz called the other relative friend without using his actual name. The Bible never tells us this man's name. Some scholars believe this is deliberate. Because the man refused to fulfill his duty as redeemer, his name was not considered worth preserving in the record. Boaz gathered 10 of the town's elders as witnesses. The number was deliberate. This was going to be a fully legal, publicly witnessed transaction. No one would be able to question the outcome later. With everyone seated, Boaz presented the case. Verses 3 and 4. Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." Boaz opened with the land. According to Israelite law, when a family was forced to sell property because of poverty, a close relative had the duty to buy it back, keeping it within the family. This was part of the Goel's responsibility. The other relative saw an opportunity. More land for his estate? Of course. "I will redeem it," he said immediately in verse 4. He seemed happy to do his duty, at least where the property was concerned. But Boaz was not finished. He had saved the crucial detail for last. Verse 5. "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." This was the real test. With the land came the obligation to marry Ruth and raise up a son in the name of her deceased husband Mahlon. That son would legally carry Mahlon's name and inherit the redeemed land. Not the Redeemer's name, not the Redeemer's existing heirs, Mahlon's. The math changed instantly. The relative would be spending his resources to buy land that would eventually pass to someone else's lineage. It would cost him money now and benefit his own family not at all in the long run. His answer came quickly. Verse 6. "Then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." He stepped aside. The cost was too high for him. He was unwilling to take on a responsibility that would diminish his own family's inheritance. To confirm the transaction publicly, the custom of the time was invoked. Verse 7 explains, "Now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel." Verse 8, "So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, 'Buy it yourself,' and he removed his sandal." It was done. The right of redemption was officially transferred to Boaz. With the way clear, Boaz stood before the elders and all the people who had gathered and made his declaration. Verses 9 and 10. "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." This was not just a legal transaction, it was a public vow. Boaz was committing himself to Ruth and to preserving the memory of her late husband's family. He was honoring the spirit of the law, not just its letter. The response from the elders and the crowd was enthusiastic. Verses 11 and 12, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." Do you understand the weight of what they were saying? They compared Ruth to Rachel and Leah, the matriarchs of Israel, Jacob's wives, the mothers of the 12 tribes. For a Moabite woman to receive such a comparison was extraordinary. They were declaring that Ruth was not a foreigner anymore. She was being accepted, honored, elevated to stand alongside the founding mothers of the nation. They also mentioned Tamar and Perez, recalling another remarkable story where a family line was preserved under unusual circumstances. Tamar, a widow denied her rights, eventually conceived by Judah, and gave birth to Perez, an ancestor of the tribe of Judah. The parallel was unmistakable. God works through unexpected women and unconventional situations to accomplish his purposes, and so the matter was settled. The negotiation at the city gate ended with celebration and blessing. What had begun as a destitute woman picking up fallen grain in a stranger's field had, through step after quiet step, led to a union that the entire community recognized as ordained. Verse 13 of chapter 4 records the marriage simply, "So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife." No elaborate ceremony is described. The text gives us the fact plainly and moves on. Boaz, a respected and prosperous man of Bethlehem, and Ruth, the Moabite outsider who had shown loyalty that most Israelites could only aspire to, were now joined together. And then came the blessing everyone had been hoping for. The verse continues, "When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son." For a woman who had been married to Mahlon for years without bearing children, this conception carried special weight. The text credits it directly to God. The Lord enabled her to conceive. This child was an answer to prayers, a restoration of a broken family line, a gift from the God under whose wings Ruth had come to take refuge. When the baby was born, the celebration was remarkable, but notice something interesting. The women of the town came to congratulate not Ruth and Boaz, but Naomi. Verses 14 and 15, "The women said to Naomi, 'Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth.'" In a culture where sons, especially many sons, were the greatest possible blessing, these women said that Ruth was better to Naomi than 7 sons. 7. The number of completeness and perfection in Hebrew thought. They were saying that one faithful Moabite daughter-in-law had brought more blessing to Naomi than the most any woman could hope for. Verse 16. "Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him." Picture this moment. Naomi, who had renamed herself Mara, who had told the people of Bethlehem that God had made her life bitter, who had said she went away full and came back empty, was now holding a baby in her arms. Her grandson. The continuation of her family line. The emptiness was being filled. The bitterness was being sweetened. The grief was not erased, but it was being redeemed. Verse 17. "The women living there said, 'Naomi has a son,' and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David." The neighbors named the child Obed, which means servant or worshipper, and then the text drops a detail that would have made any Israelite reader sit straight up. Obed was the father of Jesse, the father of David. David, the shepherd boy who would become the greatest king Israel ever had, the man after God's own heart, the king from whose line the Messiah would come. Think about that. What started as a story about a widow picking up leftover grain in a field was all along a story about the lineage of kings and the ancestry of the Messiah himself. The Book of Ruth ends with a genealogy in chapter 4, verses 18 through 22. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. This list of names is not just an appendix tacked onto a nice story. It is the key to understanding why this story is in the Bible at all. The Book of Ruth reveals that God was working through ordinary people in ordinary circumstances to build the extraordinary lineage that would lead to David, and through David, to Jesus Christ. Ruth, a Moabite woman, became the great-grandmother of King David. Let that settle in for a moment. A woman from a people group that was generally despised by the Israelites, descendants of Lot's incestuous relationship, a nation that Deuteronomy 23 verse 3 specifically excluded from the assembly of the Lord, was placed directly in the royal lineage. No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. And yet, here was Ruth, welcomed into the community, married to one of its most prominent men, and honored as an ancestor of the king. Her faithfulness to God and to Naomi transcended ethnic boundaries and centuries of prejudice. Centuries later, when the Gospel of Matthew opens with the genealogy of Jesus Christ, Ruth is mentioned by name. Matthew 1, verse 5. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed, the father of Jesse. She is one of only 5 women named in the entire genealogy of Jesus. Her presence there is striking and deliberate, a reminder that God's plan of salvation was never limited to one nation or one bloodline. So what does this story teach us? First, God uses unlikely people. Ruth had no status, no wealth, no connections. She was a foreigner from a despised nation, and yet God placed her at a critical juncture in the lineage of the Messiah, as Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 1, verses 27 and 28. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are. Ruth's inclusion in Jesus' lineage tells us something fundamental about God's character. His plan of salvation was always meant to reach beyond Israel to every nation and every people. As he promised Abraham in Genesis 12, verse 3, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Through Ruth, a Moabite, God was already keeping that promise, foreshadowing the day described in Revelation 7, verse 9, when people from every nation, tribe, people and language will stand before God's throne. Second, the story gives us a powerful picture of redemption. Boaz, as the kinsman redeemer, mirrors what Jesus Christ would later do for all of humanity. Just as Boaz paid a price to buy back Elimelech's inheritance and marry Ruth, bringing her into the family, Jesus paid the ultimate price, his own life, to redeem us from sin and bring us into relationship with God. Paul wrote in Ephesians 1, verse 7, "In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches of God's grace." And just as Boaz had to be a close relative to serve as Redeemer, Jesus, through his incarnation, became our human brother. Hebrews 2, verse 11 puts it this way, "Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family." So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. Third, this story is soaked in divine providence. Ruth happened to pick Boaz's field. She happened to arrive in Bethlehem at the start of the harvest. She happened to encounter Boaz at the threshing floor. The other relative happened to decline his right to redeem. None of these things were actually accidents. Every one of them was God's hand at work, guiding events toward a purpose that would take generations to fully reveal. As Proverbs 16, verse 9 says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." And fourth, the story shows us that small acts of faithfulness matter far beyond what we can see. When Ruth told Naomi, "Your people will be my people, and your God, my God," she had no idea that her decision would echo through thousands of years of history. She did not know she was stepping into the lineage of the Messiah. She was just being faithful in the moment, loyal to a person she loved, and committed to a God she had chosen to follow. In the same way, the choices you make today, the quiet acts of loyalty, the decisions to follow God even when the path is unclear, may carry weight that reaches far beyond your own lifetime. As Jesus said in Luke 16, verse 10, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much." Ruth's story is a living example of what Paul would write centuries later in Romans 8, verse 28. "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Through loss, grief, poverty, and hardship, God was weaving a story of redemption, a story that blessed Ruth, Boaz and Naomi in their own time, but that also rippled outward through Obed, through Jesse, through King David, and ultimately through Jesus Christ, to bring blessing to the entire world. If this story stirred something in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe you know someone who is going through a season of loss or uncertainty and needs to be reminded that God is still working, even when they cannot see it. And if you have not subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Drop a comment below and tell us which part of Ruth's story moved you the most. We would love to hear from you. And give this video a like to help it reach more people. We will see you in the next one.